Hey, it's Todd Duncan, and I am with my dear wife.
Deb Duncan, hello.
Hey, and welcome to the High Trust Today podcast. We're so excited about just jumping in the studio and chatting and talking as we try to make an impact in the world and change lives. And we thought today we would just like impromptuly talk about making hard choices. And I think that, when you look at relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a personal relationship, as in your spouse or partner, you know, if you guys are going to be together, you've got to make hard choices as you go through life. Doesn't mean every choice is hard. Some choices are easier, but the hard choices are hard choices because they're hard to make. So, what say you, right? What say you as my wife and looking at our life on just tough choices and tough decisions?
You know, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people see us from the outside and assume that our life is perfect and that we don't have to make hard choices. And I think people would be probably surprised at how many hard choices we have to make every day.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that resonates with you, but I think that there's got to be a reality check on what life is. I mean, life is a series of hard choices. Not every day, but the hard choices are those ecliptical kind of choices that can change the direction or the trajectory of a relationship. And I think back to let's talk about the hard choice when I was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so go off on that a little bit because that was one of the hardest choices we ever had to make.
Absolutely. And it was really interesting because we did a lot of research. We saw a lot of different doctors. We talked to a lot of people and found out all of sort of our options. And I thought it was really important that ultimately the decision was yours. But one of the things I loved about how we often make choices is that it goes back to the dream board we created when we first got engaged.
Right.
And what we did is we sat down and we said, okay, what really are our values and our priorities in on just one big poster? And one of our highest values was we wanted to grow old together.
Right.
And when it came right down to it, I think that you decided you were willing to take the biggest risk with the most radical option because we wanted to grow old together, regardless of if there were downsides or not.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really great illustration, and why I asked it, not only being the guy that actually had the cancer, but really knowing the power of a deep, intimate relationship with somebody who cares so much about me that any of the side effects and any of the downsides actually became irrelevant in the decision. And just to take it a step further, but not too much further, I had prostate cancer. So there's lots of side effects depending on how you get treatment and what surgical procedures you decide to do or not do. But I got to tell you something. There was a lot of comfort in making a decision, knowing that even if the physical downside risks all occurred, it would still give us the odds-on chance of having a long life together. And, I think back to that, and I believe that what drove that decision was the dream board.
I do too.
Yeah, yeah. So talk about what happened at Sales Mastery with your speech on going forward. What were you trying to communicate there about the importance of dreams, and what do you recall as you watched the audience kind of respond to your message?
Well, I've always been a big dreamer, even long before I met and married you. And I just think that when all of us have twists and turns in the journey, things we don't see coming that surprise you and take you out at the knees. And I believe the antidote when you aren't sure how you're going to make it through the next day is dreaming. And you and I think one of the things we do best together is when we get surprised, okay, what's our dream? What are the options? How are we going to figure this out?
Yeah. I think one of the things that is really kind of interesting is Deb asked people to think about, the highlights of their last year, the highlights of their last month, and the highlights of their last week. And I think come up with 3 for each of those, and then kind of arrive at the commonality. And the commonality in the highlights of your life is really the signal for what you're about.
Right. What
And
brings you to life?
what brings you to life, what brings you joy. So part of what I think can rob people of joy is not knowing how to make hard decisions. And even though we used a example of me having cancer, there's all kinds of choices that couples have to make, and there's all kinds of ways in which those choices can be made. We had a little issue last week when we were on the road where we had to make a choice about whether or not we would engage in an appointment with somebody that we definitely wanted the appointment with, but because of our values and because of what we had going on with another client, talk about how easy that decision was.
Well, it was really interesting because we knew if we didn't have this particular appointment, that there was a chance it would never happen. But we went back to our values, which was doing the right thing. And what we thought under those circumstances was how to have character. And if nobody else knew still what was the right thing, what could we live with? And we made what for us was a hard choice, a disappointing choice, but what we felt like was the right thing to do.
Yeah. I think we always have to look at what our filters are. And I think hard choices are hard choices because they're not easy. And I think that one of the things that confuses people when they try to make hard choices is they don't have clarity. And one of the things we talked about at Mastery about this idea of going forward is the importance of clarity. And one of the things that you encouraged that we would do in the company is help every employee develop clarity around where they wanted to go. So talk a little bit about that exercise.
So we had everyone come up with their dream boards, and then we all got together as a company and shared it. It was really extraordinary how much we learned about different people and really what their vision for their life was, whether it was in business or with family. And I learned so much about people and their personalities. And one of the people in our company did this great dream board that had a shower head on it. And it was 3D and very interesting. And he shared with everybody that he heard the study that one of the ways for a long relationship, quality relationship, marriage, was if you showered with your spouse all the time. And I love that he's like, so my wife and I, we shower together all the time. And I thought, how beautiful, that for him, there was something that he was going to do for the rest of his life because he wanted to be married for 50 years and was really clear about that. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, no, and I think what this points to is that, whether you're a leader, whether you're on a team following somebody, whether you are the CEO of a company or whether you're a brand new salesperson, life is about a series of choices, right? And I think that what we want to do is we want to try to minimize making bad choices. And so the question has to be about what is the filter that you run your decisions through so that, you and whomever you are with for life, if you're in a marriage or a relationship, you guys make wise choices together. I think everybody would agree listening to this podcast and watching it is that a series of really, really great choices, even though the reality of consistently making great choices is not high odds, the more great choices you make, the more harmony that you have.
I think it's really hard to make lots of bad choices and have a great life. I think that one of the things we try to do all the time is just make the best choice of the options that we have.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I think is interesting, and maybe because I love how you bring this story alive, talk about our time in Australia with John and, being on that yacht and just asking him the question you asked him about how he makes choices. To put this in the right framework, This is a guy that I've known for 27, 28 years that has built one of the most successful financial services company in Australia. And we were out on Sydney Harbor kind of celebrating our relationship. And Deb asked a question.
Well, it was really interesting. It was the first time I'd actually ever met him. And we go walking out to the Opera House, this famous Sydney Opera House. And we were told to be at this certain place at this certain time. And this massive yacht comes pulling up with two gentlemen waving at you going, Todd, Todd. It was quite a interesting, surreal circumstances. So the boat docked and we both got on it. And I'll never forget, John, you did a lot of training for John, helping him and James build his company many years ago. And I'll never forget John saying, Todd, look what we did. And he gives you a lot of credit for what he was able to accomplish. So we had this magical lunch boating around, Darling Harbor. And both of them are extraordinary, smart, entrepreneurial, sophisticated businessmen. And I remember, I don't remember the exact question I asked him, but he was really open about the fact that he'd made a lot of good choices and, some other choices as well. And do you remember the question I asked him?
What it got down to was he had some near-death experiences business-wise, right?
Yes.
And I think one of the things that entrepreneurs and dreamers and doers will always have to reconcile is, what are they willing to bet the farm on? What are they willing to bet the future of the company on? And so it was that dialogue of near-death experiences in the business, and I think he had probably three that were, a left turn or a right turn could have been the difference between staying solvent and not, or staying afloat and not. And you asked him, you said, so how do you make decisions when you have to make big decisions? And he started talking to you about where he goes.
Yes. So he said he always turns around, and it's been a while. I wasn't planning on talking about this today, so my head's a little scrambled. But he distances himself 5 years in the future and turns around and looks at the situation and says, if I know things are going to go right, which decision would I make? Is that the way you remember it?
Yeah. And he actually goes to a place. So if I make this decision today and I go out 5 years and I look back, will it have been the right decision? And I think what it did is it just reminded us that life it's about decisions. Yes. And I think that part of why we just wanted to do this quick podcast was the idea that decisions are, especially the big ones, are not to be taken lightly. And there is a difference between having a filter that helps you be decisive around a decision and being fearful of making the decision and getting distracted about making the decision or the choice. And for us, I remember him always being purposeful that the reason he got into the business in the first place was to make a difference in the Australian homeowner's life. And he said that became the filter through which he would run his decisions. Will this help us do a better job doing that? And so the questions about hard choices are, what is the right way to communicate with one another if you have a business partner, a spouse, whatnot. And I think two minds are better than one. And I think that, when you look at relationship, there's a lot of truth to not letting ego drive decisions, to really slow things down and make wise choices and incorporate into intuition and vulnerability and maybe wisdom. And not everything turns out rosy, but you learn from them. And so we have, an experience together as husband and wife where we have and will have to make always hard choices, which I think if thinking about the future and wanting to be individually and as a couple the best version of you possible, you have to make choices. You can't go into autopilot. You can't just cruise. And I think that's one of the big lessons I've learned. The other big lesson I've learned, and this may or may not impact you guys, is I've learned the power of trusting your partner. And I think that life is lonely if you're solo having to make decisions without the counsel of, in this case, somebody who loves you dearly and whom you love in return dearly. But even in the world of where do you seek counsel? The bigger the decisions, I think the more you need to trust the people that are advising you. And I'd like to ask you, because you find strength in sharing your truth, and you find strength in being secure in our relationship, that there's vulnerability there, but there's also security there. Can you just talk briefly about that?
One of the things I'm working on right now is realizing I say to myself, stand in love and speak my truth. And that's really helped me, especially when I have, hard things I need to talk to anyone about, but especially you, especially when we're making business decisions or, decisions about our future, that that is that I'm trying more and more. I'm a stuffer. I am. I am an incredibly private person, and I don't and I think there's been a lot of fear in my life about making wrong choices. So I tend to really hold back. And you've been really amazing for me because you don't have a lot of fears. And I think that it's helped me to take more chances. And one of the things you've done really well lately is that you're allowing me space, whether it's business or our personal lives, to have an opinion, even if it isn't something you share. You will hear me out. Granted, it's been after a lot of years of therapy, but I appreciate how you balance me and support me, even if you don't agree with my position on something.
Yeah, and I would give credit to Deb too, because it's you think about life coaching, you think about having advisors that that you rely on for truth, and there's therapeutic value, there's psychological value, there's all kinds of emotional value. We don't have all the answers. When I say we, not Deb and I, certainly we don't, but you don't either, and nobody in our company has all the answers. And so there's a lot of power in trusting truth, and there's a lot of power in realizing that if people really care about each other, then they will advise from a position of love and hope for you. And I think the other thing that we've learned, and maybe we'll end with this, I think that this was powerful when we started understanding that everybody's got different realities. And we had an experience where we listened to something with that Brene Brown was talking about, and she talked about the fact that you can't really get great advice from people who have not been in the arena fighting the fight you're fighting. Can you just talk briefly about that?
Oh, man, absolutely.
Yeah.
When we were dealing with your cancer, we would turn to people who had been in that situation when,
right.
Whether it was parenting or financial decisions, we have always said, we need to go to people who have lived through what we are trying to survive or make choices in. And I think it's one of the best things that we do together is by not taking advice from well-meaning people who haven't lived through whatever it is we're going through.
There's the key right there. You only want to get advice from people who have lived through what you are going through. Otherwise, to your point, the well-meaning individual has a heart for you. They want you to win. But if they haven't been there, like let's just say, for example, throw it out. I think about my friend Dave Ramsey. Dave's career was built on the idea that I had to go through bankruptcy, and I didn't want anybody else to have to go through it. When you're in bankruptcy, I've never been in. I don't know what it is like. But Dave told me, he said, when you're going through bankruptcy, you want to talk to people that have made it through bankruptcy. when you're going through maybe a marital separation, you want to talk to people that have gone through it and made it work. If you have any setback as a parent, or you have addiction in your family, or you have this, you want to talk to people that have lived through what you are going through. And that's the best advice I think we can give, and it's certainly the best advice we've ever gotten.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks. This was fun. And thanks, guys, for tuning in to the High Trust Today podcast. We're just going to do whatever we can, whenever we can, however we can, for whomever we can to continue to help you level up in life. So thanks for paying attention for 15 minutes or so, and hopefully this was valuable for you. Thanks, honey.
We love you.
Love you. Bye.